All right. So we've covered a lot. We've covered working with external JavaScript files. We've covered event listeners, right? I can create a card. And when I create a card, and let's scroll down to this other code. When I generate a card, I've added what's called an event listener to that specific element, right? That HTML element that I've created. So when I hover over these, it fires a mouse on event or a mouse over event, and that calls this JavaScript code. When the mouse pointer moves away, it fires a mouse off event. Events have another behavior called bubbling or propagation. And to show you what I mean by this, I've built a little example here. And so just to kind of walk us through what we have, I have an H2, I have an outer div that is red, and I have an inner div that is green. And I've added a little CSS just for styling. And I've added an on-click event listener, which you can add to any element, not just the button. And the inner one will fire some JavaScript saying goodbye, and the outer one will fire some JavaScript saying hello. And if I go up here, our goodbye message is really simple. We see goodbye. And this was the event that I was trying to find before. And so now when I click on my green inner element, we see this goodbye message. And then it prints out some information about the event, a pointer or mouse event, all this interesting information. There's in fact X and Y coordinates and just all sorts of other things, right? Tons of information. So let's see something interesting. And if I click here, my red outer one, and let's uncomment this. And let me, in fact, turn on sort of the zoom annotator to help us see really clearly where my mouse pointer is. So if I click in this red outer one, we see hello. And that's what we'd expect. Now that I've uncommented this code, though, for say hello, that is attached with an event listener to this outer element, right? Just to sort of remind us here, let's look at how these are organized. And the outer one says hello, and the inner one says goodbye. Watch what happens when I click on the inner one. And we see goodbye, and we see hello. There's also this change color on hover happening, so it's printing out a lot of stuff. So that stuff we can ignore. And in fact, let me just kind of comment that out so it doesn't add too much to our console. So this is a little weird because if I click on the inner one, it fires the other function as well, right? And so what's going on here? And in fact, if I added another function, and let's call this const, just say something. And let me, in fact, just copy this. And I go to my HTML, and let's add another div. And let me make sure I get these set up right. And so I want this to be most outer. The ID doesn't matter. What matters is it's going to call, say, something. And I'm not going to give it a class. It's just going to sort of exist without taking up a lot of space. So we have 3 of these. divs. In fact, let's just do style equals, and let's just do like padding uh, for PX, and let's do border 2PX solid blue. And so that's my third and outer div. And if I click now on the innermost one of these three layers, I see goodbye coming from my inner function. I see hello coming from the middle containing one. And then I see something coming from this one. So one event fires off all three of these functions. So what's going on here? So this is called event bubbling or event propagation. I see there's a couple questions, and give me just a minute. And so when you create a DOM event, the way that the document object model is designed is that event doesn't just stop, it sort of keeps on going. And let me draw an arrow here as well. So I click here on this innermost div, and this is where my event is created. But the event bubbles. It's sent to the element outside of it, to its parent, and its parent's parent, and it goes all the way up the document, the element tree, until it reaches the very top. And in fact, if I went to my JavaScript code and I did document add event listener, I think it's on click. I hope it's on click. And let's actually DOM mouse click event. Let me make sure I have the name right. And it might just be a click event. And if we go back here, everything should be the same way it is. So let's just try click. And fingers crossed, what we're going to see now is we see that something was clicked message that I added to the whole document, right? Or if I did document.body.add event listener, that one click bubbles up through the entire tree of our HTML elements or our nodes of our DOM tree. And this is what's called event propagation or event bubbling. And it can be really useful for certain things. And this is how the document object model passes information around, right? An event bubbles up. But sometimes you don't want this to happen. So what you can do is on this event object, you can call a method called, I believe it's called stop propagation. I'm not sure why it wasn't giving me the autocomplete there. And propagation and bubbling are the same thing here. And so I'm stopping this on say hello. And so we should see this inner goodbye message printed, the hello message, but we should not see say something. Right? And if I go here now and I click, we see goodbye and we see hello, but we don't see say something. And in fact, if I add, and let me go ahead and get rid of our Zoom drawings here. If I add event stop propagation here on say goodbye, we won't see any of the other messages when I click on the innermost one. We just see goodbye. And if I click on the parent hello element here in the red, we see hello, and that's it. Now, if I click anywhere else, we see something was clicked because it doesn't matter where I click, it just bubbles up through the tree, right? I could click anywhere where it's not being captured and it's going to go up to the body that has an event listener. So I know there were a couple questions. So let me just pause here and see what questions folks have. Rick, yes, sir.
My hand only went up because I thought you were asking a question to the class, but I put my answer. You were asking why is it whenever you click inside the green box, it also fires the red box, and I put there that it was a parent-child relationship. You're talking about bubbling, and yeah, that's correct. But it's it's also because like if they didn't have a parent-child relationship, you could click the green box all day long and the red's never going to fire. But if they are nested divs, then one's the parent of the other. So, like you said, it bubbles up. So if a function of the green box is
Yeah,
fired, also the red box is fired, and so on.
yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. It matters where the event is created, right? And if I create an event down here in the tree, it bubbles up to the parent and it keeps bubbling up, right? So from here, it goes up to the parent and it keeps bubbling up. From here, it bubbles up to the parent and it keeps bubbling up. So clicking on this div, it bubbles up to the parent, but it doesn't affect its siblings. Alex, yes, sir.
Okay, so we could take on the diagram we're looking at that div container with the circle. Um, when you add event stop propagation to main, does it kill the entire bubble, or are you just saying that it's like stopping it for main and then it would circumnavigate to its grandparent, so to speak, which
It
is like
kills the
body?
Yeah, it kills the entire bubble. That's a good
Got it.
question. Like if I do a mouse click here and it goes up to main, I have to have an event listener, right? So maybe I have let's just say it's a click event because that's the easiest one to talk about, I think. I click on this div here. The click bubbles up and the document object model checks for a click event listener as it bubbles up. So if main has, if I've done, add event listener, click, I can just spell click. And TL draw is defeating me here. There we go. And I have an event and I decide that what I'm going to do with that event is stop propagation. And let's just sort of move this over here and make it a bit smaller so it doesn't take up massive amounts of space. So this is a very condensed one-line arrow function, but I am adding an event listener to this main DOM element, right? That says, hey, if you get a click event, stop propagation. And so because of that, the event no longer bubbles up. Without stop propagation, it would keep bubbling up to the body and the HTML and the top of the document tree. Yeah, great question. That's a key point. What other questions do folks have, or what else are people curious about here? Tom, yes, sir.
Is there ever a time that you might need to remove an event listener instead of just stopping propagation?
There used to be when in the days before React.js, you absolutely might be dynamically adding and removing event listeners. These days, once we start using React.js, we won't even be manually creating event listeners at all. Yeah, that's a great question. And in practice, what often just happens is like the DOM node, the element itself, gets removed. All right, let's well, let me check in and see if there's other questions here around propagation, because this is kind of a key concept. Okay, cool. Um, how are we doing? Should we keep rolling or do we want to take a short break? All right, let's keep on.
All right,
Oh,
no,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
All right, let's keep on rolling. And we're coming to kind of the final form, no pun intended, working with forms and input data. And this is going to put all of these pieces of the puzzle together. We're going to be getting info from the DOM. We're going to be stopping event bubbling with stop propagation. We're going to be adding event listeners for clicking and form submission. And we're going to be using JS to modify the DOM. So this should be pretty cool. So let me kind of build out sort of the world's simplest form. And let me go ahead and let's give ourselves a little bit of space here. And I think what I'll do too is let's add some breaks. And I'll delete these later, but just visually this way we have a little more room to work with. And I'm going to make a containing div just so we have it. We might come back and use it later. Let's create a form element. Now, by itself, the form element doesn't do much. But inside of a form element is where we put different kinds of input elements. The simplest being an input field for some text like a name. And now I have an input field where I can enter my name. And I'm just going to add a break just for visual purposes. And let's add another break for visual purposes. And let's add a button. And the button type will be submit. And we'll just say submit. Oh, excuse me. There we go. That ought to do it. And a couple interesting things now happen. If I click on this button, and actually let me note how it doesn't matter where I click now, because we have that event listener on the whole document. From this document body, add event listener, I can click anywhere, and we see this something was clicked. So let's actually comment that out, because that's going to be a little annoying. So something interesting happens now with this form when I hit the submit button. Can you all see that the page is actually getting refreshed when I click on submit? Do you see what I mean? The browser is reloading index.html from the server when I click on this submit button. So what's going on here? This is from the earliest days of the internet, where web pages were really simple. And the only way to send data from my browser on my computer to pets.com's server over the internet was with an HTML form. And I might enter my name and I might enter other information, like maybe my favorite Pokemon. I don't even know Pokemon all that well. And I would enter my name and my favorite Pokemon. And when I hit submit, the browser is actually sending this form data to the server over the internet. And it's refreshing the page because often the server would then redirect the browser to a different page that says, thank you for submitting that information. With modern JavaScript and React.js, we don't really need this behavior anymore, but it's so kind of old that it's just built into browsers and it's built into this form element. And if I get rid of the form element and I'm going to comment it out, I can click this button till the cows come home and nothing happens. So the form element gives us a lot of useful things, but it also has this older behavior that we really don't want. And luckily, there is a type of event for a form submission called onSubmit. So I can add an onSubmit event listener to my form. And we'll have it call a function we're about to create called handle form submit. And if I enter stuff, we see there's actually an error because this function doesn't exist yet, but the whole page refreshes. So let's write handle form submit and see what we can do with it. And I'm going to console log that we get that we're in here. But the first thing I'm going to do is on this event, I'm going to call a function called prevent default. And this stops the default behavior of the form. And I keep doing the other kind of commenting. And it stops the form from refreshing the page. And it stops the event bubbling or propagation. And so with modern JavaScript, this is usually what we want to do if we're using a form. And now we haven't dealt with our information yet. But when I click on event, I have an error in my code because I forgot an equal sign here. There's that red squiggly. It says syntax error on line 28 and missing initialization error. So I just need to add the equal sign. If I can just get the VS Code annotator to stop doing what it's doing. Zoom is wrestling with me here. Give me just a second. The Zoom annotator was trying to draw. There we go. And the red squiggly is gone. And now if I submit, we see my handle form submit function was called, but prevent default stopped the page from refreshing, right? If I comment this line out, we still see the refresh. We can very briefly see my message, but then the page is refreshed. So you almost always want to do event.prevent default when you're working with forms. So the next question here is, how do I get the data from my form? And it's hiding here in this event object that carries all that information, right? And so when I click this submit button, that event bubbles up, it's captured by the form. And the form is also getting all the information in all these different fields. We have to go through a couple hoops to get the data from the form, because this process is a little arcane. I have to use a JavaScript class called form data that really only exists for this. And I pass it the event.target. Otherwise, it's the data's in a format that's just not really possible to work with. I then want to really turn that into an object. Because if we look at form data, we're going to kind of see what it looks like. So I could enter my name. I'll enter, my limited Pokemon knowledge. I know Charmander exists. And we see here this form data object has a whole bunch of stuff on it that is like the actual data somewhere in there. I could probably use entries and for each and all this other stuff, but it's a bit of a pain. So what we do instead is we're just going to turn it into an object. And now if I console log that, we have something much nicer to work with. So now we've seen how I can create an HTML form, and I can add different kinds of inputs to it. I might add like, I'm not going to worry. You can add checkboxes and drop downs and other kinds of inputs. In the interest of time, I don't think I'm going to code that out right now, because I do want us to show how to work with this now that we've gotten this data. So I've got my form data. Let's see how we can use this to display information. And let's use the span element that we don't see as much, but it's designed for putting stuff on the same line. And let's give it an ID, and let's say display name. And right now we don't see anything, but in a minute we will. And let's also do one for display favorite Pokey. And I could name these whatever I want, but I'm making the names consistent with the form fields for my own sanity. And so what I want to do now is once I submit and enter in this information, I want to actually update these to show my name and my favorite Pokemon. So what I can do now is get the elements I want to display the info on, and then we are going to modify, element dot inner text to display form info. So let's do display name, and we'll do document get element by ID, and I believe I did display dash name, and we'll do display name dot inner text equals form object dot, and it should be name, and let's see if that works. And I'm going to go ahead and just enter my name and click on my button. And name is here, so that's correct. Something in my code I think is not working correctly. And we see here, by the way, in this input field, the name here determines the property name on the object, right? So because this is name, my object has this property name with the value atom. And then because I added the name element, I set for the second input field to favorite pokey. We see here on my object with the form data, the property name is favorite pokey, and it'll have, whatever I put in there. But it looks like there's an error in my code, and let's see what we did wrong. So I'm pretty sure this part's correct, form object.name, but maybe I didn't get the display name. So let's console log display name and see what we get. And we see we got a span. Oh, and now it actually seems to be updating. So I may have just missed that it was working, or maybe I needed to refresh the page. Oh, I think we're off to the races now. And we can do the same thing for our Pokemon. And I do need to remind myself what I gave that ID, display favorite Poke. And we're going to set the value of the text that it displays to, let me make sure, see what my property name here is again. Whoop. I need my console log statement back as my sort of reminder. There we go. Favorite dash Poke. That's what I needed. So we're going to do display Poke dot inner text equals form object dot favorite dash Poke. And the VS Code autocomplete seemed to get a little ahead of itself there. And now I enter my name and my Pokemon. It seems like we are almost there, but Poke is not defined. Handle submit, form submit. Tom, yes, sir.
Instead of display favorite pokey, wouldn't it be the favorite pokey?
Let's, in fact, I'm going to simplify all of these names because I think I'm getting a little lost in the sauce. We'll just have that be Pokey. We'll just call this display dash Pokey. And now over here, document get element by ID. And this should just be display dash Pokey. And now this should just be plain old Pokey without the dash. And let's see if that works. Nope, but this is almost definitely a typo. Because I have this span with an ID display dash Pokey. And
Actually, oh, never mind. I thought, well, you were in your index. I think you forgot to save it because you got a little
oh,
thing.
you're absolutely right. Thank you. And honestly, half the time, that's exactly sort of the error with this sort of stuff. And there we go. Thank you so much, Rick, because that one, I definitely was getting zeroed in on the wrong part of the code. And so now we're capturing our form information and we're displaying it. So that was really kind of the last major piece I wanted to show here. And using these tools, we can really do anything we want with our HTML page, right? I could create a to-do list. I can modify the title of my page. I can add cards that could have all sorts of data or anything I want. I can click anywhere I want or hover over anything I want and see that change, and something is not happy with that hovering. And now we can start to build like really rich, powerful, and interactive HTML pages. And again, later on, we'll learn about React.js, which makes all of this way easier. But even with the React.js framework, we still have to have a really strong understanding of the document object model, how HTML elements are represented as nodes in a tree, and this idea of event bubbling and listening, and then also being able to stop event propagation. So I just want to pause here and see what's on people's minds and what folks have questions about. All right, awesome. In that case, hopefully we are now off to the races, right? This is the front end of our full stack application. We've seen how to interact with the browser and the DOM and do all sorts of cool things with it. Write JavaScript that runs in the browser, deal with event bubbling and propagation. And there's tons of events. You should definitely play around and explore that. And then in the next lesson, we'll see how to have the JavaScript running in my browser, not just display this information, but send it to my Flask server, say to save it in a database or grab information from that database and show it here on my front end. So thank you guys very much.